Hello and welcome to Underlords Universe, and this is a place where we like to discuss the stuff that inspires us to continue to be creative in our own right. We do all kinds of music and literary stuff, basically as a creative outlet. And Kiss is has been one of the things that has inspired us since we were kids. So my brother here, Mr. Speed, Brent, uh, he and I do a bit of the musical stuff together, called Underlords of the Overworld. More on that at the very end. If you're a Kiss fan and you've stumbled across this, or if you've seen our previous episodes on ranking and discussing the Kiss albums, this this is part 7. I think, right, Brent? I think we did 6.
6 or 7?
Excuse me, 6. Yeah, I think
Wow.
6. We chunked the catalog into 6, where we discussed each of those sets of 6 albums and then ranked those. And now this is a totality of the entire Kiss catalog where all of the rankings fit in. And we kind of take a different approach to this. We wanted to apply a bit of a method where we might even surprise ourselves with the outcomes. So what we do is we take each song on the albums, give them up to 5 points each, and then divide by the total number of songs possible, whether it's 9 or 10 or however many songs are on an album, for an average rating. And then we also add up the total number of points and divide by the total number of points possible to get an average percentage. And I got to tell you, out of the 20 Kiss records, uh, I was actually completely surprised by some of the results of this and completely not surprised by other results. So it made me think of the Kiss catalog in its entirety a little bit differently than I had before. And, we've been thinking about the Kiss albums most of our lives, for decades. So it's been kind of a fun exercise.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
since there are 20 albums, we figure we kind of just do them in quick kind of chunks of 5 and discuss in those chunks of 5 where some surprises might have come about, et cetera, et cetera. So we're
We're
gonna
gonna
start. Oh, sorry, go
we're,
ahead, Brent.
we're gonna count down from 20 to 1 backwards. And we're not counting the 78 solo records. They're not a part of this. We'll do a separate episode with those and we'll kind of just see where they might drop in.
Yeah,
And we're not doing anything like Killers, even though there were new tracks on Killers, Smashes, Thrashes, and we're not doing the live records. These are just the band's 20 studio albums. And we're going to be counting them down 20 to 1 in chunks of 5, right?
right, right. So and I think it's worth saying, if you've gotten this far with this, and if you're a Kiss fan, obviously you have your own opinions, and to one extent or another, to one degree or another, I like every Kiss album that's ever been put out. I like some
Yeah,
more than others. So by
right.
putting an album in slot number 20, by no means saying it's a bad album. Everybody's entitled to their own point of view. That's what makes this kind of interesting. In fact, I'm like I said before, I'm kind of surprised at some of the results when I calculated my totals. For example, and I think this is a good segue as we get into this, uh, the album that came in number 20 for me, I knew it personally, I knew it was going to rank a little lower than a lot of other Kiss fans would rank it. Okay. Some Kiss fans are going to say this is one of the best albums they've ever made.
Hmm.
My number 20, and are you ready for this? Ready to go for number
Almost
20? You,
ready. Yeah,
do
we'll
you, do
see.
you have do you have all of your
Yeah, I got them. You want me to go ahead and hold mine up when you hold yours up? Is that how we're going to do
yeah.
it?
So my number 20 came in, and when we do after the first 5, we'll talk about some surprises here.
Okay.
My number 20 was Revenge.
My number 20 was Hot in the Shade.
Wow, you're wrong. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So
Well, like you said, we like all these records. So one record had to be number 20, and for me, this was it. I still like this record. I just don't like it as much as some
and
of the other records.
and somebody out there is saying, Brent, Mr. Speed, totally agree with you there. And somebody and like everybody out there is looking at me and saying, what an idiot.
Are they?
Fine, that's cool. That's cool. But we'll address it. This is one of the surprising elements to me. Okay. In the number 19 spot for me was Psycho Circus.
Crazy Nights number 19.
19? Ah, okay. Okay. All right. Number 18. Number 18 for me was Crazy Nights.
At Sonic Boom at number 18.
Okay.
So far we have one where we've only had one of three where we've raised the same record so far. Not at the same time, but we each have Crazy Nights in the bottom three.
Right. So now we're on to number 17, right?
Yes.
Number 17 for me was Carnival of Souls.
I got Psycho Circus.
Okay. 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 So we got a couple of close similarities there.
Mm-hmm.
And number 16 for me, this is another one people are going to be like, what are you talking about?
Oh, they'll say the same about mine.
Mine's Lick It Up.
Is Revenge. Okay, I do say that about yours. But yeah, mine, yeah. So we both have Revenge in the bottom five, which a lot of people probably wouldn't. And I'll just go ahead and ask you.
Yep.
We're going to take a little bit of time here and kind of talk about some of these records.
Yeah, just as they relate, yeah, in the ranking.
Yeah, was that one of your bigger surprises that Revenge came in number 20? I mean, you and I have talked before about how we don't think the album's aged particularly well over the last 30 plus years. It's
Yeah.
got some really good tracks on it, but it's got some cheese on it too. Was that really a big surprise for you, or was that a
It's one of the, I mean, it's sonically, it's incredible.
yes?
Bruce's guitar playing, his solos on this album are fantastic. Never mind the fact that Dick Wagner actually did the guitar solo on Every Time I Look at You. But that aside, Revenge, it's got some absolutely killer stuff on it. I mean, I think Heart of Chrome is great. Thou Shalt Not is great. Um,
Holy is great.
Unholy is great. But I think it's marred by some cheese and some just excessively inane lyrics. So I actually thought it was going to rank lower, but I didn't think it was necessarily going to come in dead last. And where it
Okay.
really surprised me is I was surprised that it came in lower than Psycho Circus. To me, Psycho Circus is like the biggest hodgepodge of a record that they ever did, and there's greater continuity. I think Revenge as an album, start to finish, has a more of a solid album, cohesive album feel to it. So if I was ranking these based on more intangible qualities, I'd probably rank Psycho Circus last, you know. But we're doing this according to the numbers as they were born out in the way we did our system. By the way, our system, we're not saying it's a perfect system. Every system is going to have flaws because we're trying to quantify the qualitative.
Right.
But that's just what makes how we're doing this a little different. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I probably would reach for Revenge more often than I would reach for Psycho Circus. But it came in a few percentage points lower. So yeah,
That
that
was
was
my question. How close was your 20 and 19? Because for me, there was an 8 point gap between 20 and 19. So Hot in the Shade
but
for me is
yeah.
clearly the weakest of the 20 records. Crazy Nights was 8 points higher than that. How about you?
Mine actually, it was five percentage points difference. So
It's a pretty big.
not terribly insignificant as a yeah.
No.
Um, Now, at the same time, the way we rated these songs 1 to 5 and etc., the mood that you're in when you're listening to it and things like that can be factors as well. So again, we understand this isn't science here, okay? It's just
No.
okay. The other thing is, I had Look It Up at what number 16, right? And
Yeah, that's a real shocker to me. I got to be honest. That's a real shock.
well, I think if we go back to the actual reviews that we did of these before, to me, this album just kind of on the whole ends up giving me a bit of ear fatigue. It's like it's a little one note from Gene for me. I think that I think that Crazy Nights has some real Velveeta on it. But I think there's some high points, you know. I think songs like uh, Hell or High Water, Thief in the Night are really, really strong. I actually really like Carnival of Souls. It's more of a novelty album to me. It's not what I necessarily go to as a Kiss record, but I think there's some outstanding stuff on it. You know, again, we like all these records. We like all
Yeah.
these records, but they just got to rank in somewhere, right? So what would you say is the big surprise for you in that first set of five from 20 to 16?
Um, Two, kind of. I'm a little, not that these were lower in my rankings, but I'm a little surprised that Sonic Boom and Revenge didn't do a little bit
Mm-hmm.
better. Now there, I think I can chalk Sonic Boom and Revenge up there where they came in with respect to. There's some duds on these records like Danger Us. I think I gave that a 0, which you know, Domino, not a good song. So there's some stinkers on some of these records, but I kind of expected Hot in the Shade, Crazy Nights to kind of be lower on the scale. I didn't necessarily think that of Revenge, even though I don't think the album's aged particularly well. Like you said, it sounds phenomenal. It's got some really good tracks on it. Bruce is playing phenomenal on the record. Um, but as you also said, some records have to be 16 through 20, and for me, it just happened to be these. Hot in the Shade was no surprise for me. That's always been my least favorite Kiss record.
And it
Um,
and it came up that way.
it came up that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say Sonic Boom and Revenge, Psycho Circus, not much of a surprise, as you said. It's really a hodgepodge, and it's a good sounding record, but there's really hit and miss with a lot of the tracks on that album. So
Okay.
one thing that's interesting, there's not really a trend when you look at 16 through 20. It's like, you've got non-makeup Kiss, you've got, Sonic Boom, Psycho Circus, the makeup's back on, different guys in the band. I've got Hot in the Shade and Crazy Nights from the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not really a trend either, which I think is interesting. It's like we like all eras of the band, I think it's fair to say, probably equally. We like
Yeah.
all different lineups of the band. We like the guys that have been in the band. So not really a trend, I don't think, for either of us when you look at 16 through 20, which is
Yeah.
also kind of
All right. Well, hey, let's hit 15 through 11 here. All right.
do it.
My number 15 was Asylum.
And mine is Monster.
Wow. Okay. Okay. My number 14 is Sonic Boom.
And mine is Animalize.
Wow, we're
Now,
over the
some
map
people
on this.
some people might say this is crazy that this is so low, but
My number 13 is Hot in the Shade.
and mine is Carnival of Souls.
And number 12 for me is Love Gun.
Love Gun.
Wow.
So we agree on one. One out of 12 so far we agree, or whatever. We are
Yep.
11.
Yep. And then number 11 for me was Music from the Elder.
And the debut for me, which kind of a surprise. This
Yeah, yeah.
this
So
greatest debut albums of all time, and it came in at number 11.
okay, if I heard you right, you just said it's one of the greatest debuts of all time, but it came in at number 11,
Yeah. Well,
which
I mean, what does that tell you about the rest of the catalog?
well, what it tells me is that when you listened to the albums, you tried to give at least as objective of a score to those songs as you could as you were listening to them. How much do I really like this song? And the idea of like, well, what's a 5, what's a 4, etc. We each kind of have our own internal sense of what a 5 and a 4 and a 3 and 2 and 1 is. So um, I think it's just kind of interesting because of the results being kind of like, oh my God, the debut actually came in, kind of in the middle of the pack when you might expect that to be, near the top. So just a different way of thinking through an album's catalog. That is kind of surprising to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of keeping with what we were talking about before with the other albums. That was a surprise to me as well
Hmm.
because, I mean, it ranks pretty high. It's got what, maybe half the songs on the album have been live staples for decades.
Right.
Now, we could talk about Love Theme from Kiss. We could talk about Kiss in Time because we did consider that when we did our rankings, and we can also talk about the album's production. And I think we would both agree, and correct me if I'm wrong, we like these songs, the versions on Alive, better than what's on the debut album. I think most people would agree that those are superior versions, but
Yeah.
that's not to take away from how good the debut is. So for me, if you have it come in the middle of the pack, it was a bit of a surprise.
Hmm. Yeah.
Love Gun, Love Gun, not so much. The debut, yeah, that was a bit of a surprise.
And I've always had a bit of a soft spot, honestly, for Hot in the Shade. It's very nostalgic to me. I really like actually quite a lot of the songs on the record. So to have that kind of pull in where it did, what was it, number 13 for me? Um, I'm not terribly surprised by that. I actually was kind of surprised that Sonic Boom outranked Asylum for me by one
That,
slot. And it came in, but here we're talking differences here between 67.27% and 68%. So these are some albums to me that are like really, really close when we applied our ranking scale to them, or
yeah,
rating scale, excuse me. Um,
I've got a 9 point gap between Monster and the debut. So there's a pretty big gap between 15 and 11 for me.
wow. See, I don't have that huge of a gap from 10, from album to album. If you go from like my number one album to the number 20 album, then there's a big gap, of course. But here's the thing that surprised me. The Music from the Elder came in at number 11.
I'm
And
surprised.
I've always been like, yeah, I love that record. And I know when we did the episode that on that chunk of records, I ended up kind of scratching my head over it a little bit because I ended up rating each of the songs like not quite a 5, 4.5 here, a 4 there. And that, I think it kind of brought the total down. So I would have expected going into this to put Music from the Elder a lot higher than it did. So it came in at number 11. So we're ready to go on to 10 through 6.
Almost. Let's talk about Love Gun just real quick
Oh,
because
sure, sure.
I think a lot of Kiss fans that could say both you guys are crazy to have Love Gun at number 12
Right.
out of 12. We talked about Love Gun quite a bit when we did that album grouping, but for me, there's some really good songs on the album. There's some kind of, you know, Then She Kissed Me. I know I'm not a huge fan of Hooligan. There's some stuff on the record that's just not up to snuff. Again, we like the record. The production on the record is a bit soft for me, I think.
I think
So,
compared to Rock and Roll Over, I think Rock and Roll, there's a little bit more bite to it. I like
yeah,
to me, Love Gun is to me, Love Gun's one of those nostalgia records. Like take a song like Tomorrow and Tonight. I don't think it's that great of a song.
no,
I think it's actually kind of a weak song. But
right,
when I hear it and I listen to it, it's like, okay, yeah, it's nostalgic, right? It's to me, the best songs on the record are songs like Almost Human, which I
yeah,
think is great.
yeah.
I like Hooligan quite a bit. I think the lyric is kind of funny, but um, you know, but yeah, it's to me, it's like of the original lineup albums, Love Gun came in uh last, but ranked number 12 out of all of these. And that actually did not surprise me. That did not surprise me that of the original Gene Paul Peter Ace albums, that Love Gun came in last there. So yeah. Uh
Okay.
10 through 6.
Now we're in the top 10, so
Hey,
we're moving up.
number
10,
10.
yep.
10 for me was the debut.
Oh, 10 for me is Asylum.
Okay.
So we were close on the debut.
Yeah, we
Close.
actually were. Yeah, 10. Yep. And then excuse me. 9 for me is Dress to Kill.
And 9 for me is Rock and Roll Over.
Okay. And 8 for me was Animalize,
Now I got Dynasty number 8.
Dynasty. Now, before we do 7 and 6, I just want to say one thing. The debut, Dress to Kill, and Animalize actually all tied. Like
Oh, wow.
they actually tied. And I didn't do a tiebreaker. I basically just rolled a die and said, what order am I going to put them in? Because they were all tied.
Well,
So, that's kind of interchangeable, to be honest with you. 10 Night and 8, kind of interchangeable.
well, since you mentioned it, for me, Asylum and Rock and Roll Over were also tied, but my tiebreaker was that Rock and Roll or Asylum has more five-star songs on it than
Oh,
Rock
okay.
and Roll Over.
Yeah, yeah. So we each kind of have an idea about how to do a tiebreaker. For me, I kind of thought it was like, well, sometimes I'm more in the mood for Dress to Kill than I am, you know, Animalize. And so it's like, well, if that's the case, I'll just kind of roll it. But yeah, those all actually tied for me. So yeah. And the number 7 spot for me, number 7 was Monster.
Okay? I got Hotter Than Hell number 7,
Interesting, because my number 6 is Hotter Than Hell. Number 6
and
was Hotter.
my number 6 is Dress to Kill.
Wow, actually some similarities are there as well. Here's where I was. This is going to sound a little weird, but I was actually surprised that Monster. Well, now that I think about it, maybe not. Maybe not. Um, well, I might have thought, because I really like Monster. I think that they went out kind of, they went out with a bang, I think. And I think Monster's a really solid record. If we weren't applying our system to this, I could see maybe actually ranking a little higher. But um, yeah, yeah. Other than that, the only surprise in that chunk was that 3 of those 5 actually tied exactly in their score, exact same numbers.
Yeah, so for me, I got to be a little bit honest. Dynasty and Dress to Kill were a little bit of a surprise.
Hmm.
Probably Dynasty just a little bit. I mean, it's a really, really, really good record. But to come in at number 8, I was a little bit surprised about that. I was also a little surprised, and I'm going to kind of go into the numbers here a little bit. There is just a 2 point gap between, for me, Love Gun and Rock and Roll Over. So from 12 to 9, that's 2 points. There's 5 point gap between Carnival of Souls and Rock and Roll Over. And then
What?
there's
How much of a gap there?
like, oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Less than a 4 point gap between Carnival of Souls and Rock and Roll Over. And then there's really only like a 5.5 point gap between Carnival of Souls and Dress to Kill. So from 13 to 6. So the albums are kind of getting tighter
Oh, I
as we
see.
go. They're
Yeah.
getting, gaps are kind of, there's less space in between these. Uh, and Dress to Kill, a little bit of a surprise because it's not necessarily the best sounding record. When you compare it to the dirty and gritty production of Hotter Than Hell and kind of the sterile, cold production of the first album, but Dress to Kill's got some killer songs on it that I think that just carried it to number 6 for me. Even though it was a bit of a surprise, you can't really deny how really good. Even though that album was cranked out really quick, it's like, and it's really short. There are some killer songs on that album, so
Yeah,
got to
I
give some
think
love
that
to Dress.
I think Ladies in Waiting and Two Timer are kind of the low point. It kind of dips there, but then it kind of goes off, kind of rockets up from that point. So, ready for the top 5. And
Now this is it. This is the
this
top
there
five.
there there were a couple surprises in here, but not necessarily the surprises that one might think when they look at these. So, okay, number 5 for me was Rock and Roll Over.
And number 5 for me is Music from the Elder.
So it is.
So it is.
And number 4 for me was Dynasty.
Number 4 for me is Lick It Up.
Wow. So okay, so clearly you and I,
Yeah,
clearly you like Lick It Up more than I do. That's just a fact.
that's a fact. Yeah, we can say that.
Number 3 was Destroyer.
Number 3 for me was Unmasked.
Number 2 for me was Unmasked.
And number 2 for me was Destroyer.
Wow. And
So
number
that means
1,
we agree on number 1,
Creatures of the Night.
Creatures of the Night.
Now, when you say we agree on number 1, that's going to be a discussion point here. Okay. First of all, and come back to Creatures, but I was actually surprised that Rock and Roll Over ended up in the top 5 for me. Not that I dislike it. I love Rock and Roll Over. it was just like I just didn't know where it would land. It's like okay. And kind of the same with Dynasty. I love Dynasty. I didn't know exactly where it would land.
Yeah.
Destroyer, again, I love Destroyer, but my gut would have told me it would have ranked a little lower because it's kind of like,
Yep.
man, a lot of that is just overplayed and stuff. But when I listen to the studio album of this, not the live versions of it, when I listen to the studio album, it's it's just the production of the album I just love. I love what Bob Ezrin brought to the table. Um,
The songs are great. I mean, most of the
they are.
songs of that album are really, really good.
So that that gets to the whole like the number one thing. Now, first of all, any most Kiss fans, I should say, watching this, if you're still with us, and if we haven't turned you off at this point, a
Right.
lot of Kiss fans are going to look at this and go, "Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Are
And
you
the answer,
kidding?
oh,
Unmasked is number two." And you and I both, you had it at where did you put it?
three.
Number three. And for me, it's number two. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, Brent. I'm going to look at my numbers here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's 1.5%. I just rounded it basically. There's a 1.5% difference between me for Unmasked and Creatures. And that could come down to like, well, what's my mood? What am I in the mood for? It could come
Yeah.
down to a matter of, well, I gave this song a 4.5 on this day. Maybe I would have given it a 4 on another day. These two albums could have easily flipped just as easily as the tie between the debut Dress to Kill and Animalize that I literally had an actual tie on. So my
Yeah.
number one, which is why I'm wearing the Unmasked shirt today, actually.
I
Uh,
love that shirt.
now, here's the other thing about this, and this is where I think a lot of Kiss fans would just think I'm nuts. Okay, if you ask me which is a more consistent record, start to finish, that I like in terms of consistency, I would
Mm-hmm.
actually say Unmasked. And
Mm-hmm.
if that was a factor, not just the raw scores that we used, I
Mm-hmm.
probably would have put Unmasked at number one. And the reason for that is because while I love everything on this album to one degree or another, I think Danger for me, Danger is a little lower. I'd rank that a little lower than pretty much anything on Unmasked. Um, I Love It Loud. I love the song. I tend to prefer the live versions of it a little bit more. So for those couple reasons, I mean, we're talking like splitting
Yeah.
hair differences here. And
Yeah.
most Kiss fans are going to go, "Yeah, we get it. We get this." Creatures, one of probably the best album that they ever made. But God, so many people are going to say you're crazy. Unmasked.
Yeah.
Sorry, sorry. I love. Notice how Dynasty came in the top five as well. That's why I thought, because I always thought that transitional period where they were just trying to find their footing again and like, who are we? What's our identity? I've always loved that era, which is why
Yeah.
I kind of thought that Music from the Elder would actually rank a little higher too. But that's also why we did what we did, because we wanted to find out, to try to push ourselves to be objective,
Mm-hmm.
as objective as you can get
Yeah.
where these fall, and that's how they fell. So that's how the chips fell.
Yeah. And for me, the difference between my Unmasked at number three and Creatures was about 4.5 points.
Okay.
So a little bit more of a gap, but also to let people know, you and I have always been a big fan of Unmasked in that era of the band. I mean,
Mhm.
we've always thought very highly of that record. You know, I understand a lot of fans don't care for it. Maybe the band doesn't care for it, but you and I've always loved it.
Yeah.
Uh, and this system kind of it bears that out. I mean, for it to be two for you and three for me,
Mhm.
and we have Destroyer, Unmasked, and Creatures. All both of us have those in our top five.
Which is
Um,
funny because, like Paul Stanley himself would say, yes for Destroyer, yes for Creatures, absolutely not for Unmasked.
right. And
It's
he, to
like,
me, he would
okay.
also say not for Music from the Elder. He would say no. Although I
Right.
think
Yeah.
over time, people have warmed up to that album a bit. You and I have always liked the Elder,
Yeah.
always. A lot.
Well, and
So
I think part of that you know, a lot of the stuff that influences how people listen to music and how they react to it, I think depends on their mindset when they get into a particular band and their age when they get into a particular band. And, you know, when you and our neighbor, neighbor, but mostly you, obviously, were my exposure to Kiss.
Mhm.
And that would have been around 83.
Yeah, 82, 83.
And, you know, for a lot of people, they might have been like, you know, oh gosh, okay, so Lick It Up comes out. And then like, well, what's before that? Okay, Creatures. Or what's before that? Oh, what's this, you know, weird concept album thing. But, you know, we also, you know, you and I also grew up in a household that was exposed to so much different kinds of music
Mhm.
that it was kind of like, okay, so Kiss did different kinds of music. And the question is,
Right.
you know, did we like the way they did that different kind of music? And so,
Well,
at any rate,
that's a good point because look at the top five that you have and look at the variety of the records that you
yeah,
have, or
yeah,
both of us you
yeah. To
have.
me, yeah. I'm sorry. Go
And
ahead.
no, I mean it's just you have there's for me the biggest surprise for me was having Lick It Up come in at number four. That was a
Mhm.
little bit of a surprise, but you got for me so the Elder, Lick It Up. There's not really a whole lot in common with those
No,
records.
no.
They're only separated by 2 years. Unmasked and Lick It Up, huge difference.
Mhm.
Destroyer, Unmasked, huge differences. Creatures, the Elder, Unmasked, huge differences. So there's a lot of variety in the top five and their whole catalog, as we've talked about before. And to yours, you got Dynasty in the
Mhm.
top five.
Mhm.
You got Destroyer in the top five. Creatures. Those records don't have a whole lot alike, but they're all in your top five. I think that says something about
Well, you know,
how we listen
that's
to music and what Kiss is as a band in terms of what they've done over the course of their long career.
that's you made me think of something too, because quite often, you know, like I said, that kind of transition period from, you know, Dynasty through Creatures is like one of my favorite eras of the band. The other era I would point to is the original era, Kiss, Hotter Than Hell, Dressed to Kill. That era where they're trying to you know to make it on the scene, and they're just it's like, you know, one album it flops, the second album it flops, the third album it flops, and then, you know, of course, you know, Kiss Alive kind of saves their hide. And I love that era, and yet at the same time, none of those three albums came in the top five, but Rock and Roll Over did. So,
Right.
you know, uh,
Well, and that
yeah,
kind of goes to what Kiss has even said about their first three albums. It's like those albums, as great as they might be, never really captured the essence of the band and the power that the band had on stage.
mhm,
They've been saying that for decades. Alive comes out, and
yeah,
the rest the rest is history, as they say. But um, to go back with what we said at the beginning, we like all these records. We just like some of them better than others,
yeah,
and we've been doing this. We've been doing this now for a period of months and kind of going back and revisiting the records and ranking them. And we knew there would be some surprises.
hmm,
Now we know what the surprises really are. It wasn't really a question of whether there would be, it was just a matter of what were they going to be, and
yeah,
that's a fun part of doing these
yeah.
reviews.
So here's what I propose. You know, at some point here, and I've already actually done this, so I could do this pretty quickly. But the solo albums, I mean, they're not obviously they're not Kiss band records, uh, but you know, they did have the Kiss logo. They were all released on the same day. They were presented to the public as some sort of Kiss project type of thing, even though they are solo albums.
Mhm.
So that's why we didn't put them in this mix. But we will do a solo album episode where we rank, you know, discuss and rank the four Kiss solo albums, but also where they would have ranked had they been a part of this, you know, because it'll be interesting to find out not only is Gene's album was it outrank Paul's or whatever, but how do they actually outrank do they outrank other albums? And that will be kind of interesting. So um
Now I have a question for you.
sure.
we do this exercise, and this I'm going to kind of put you on the spot. So I'm
Mhm.
going to ask you if you have somebody who really doesn't know anything about Kiss, and they're coming to you and they're saying, "Hey, Brian, give me three Kiss albums of the 20 that the band has done. Give me three that you would recommend as kind of a good first listen to kind of get me into the band. What are the three records out of the 20 that we just talked about that you'd recommend to this person? It doesn't have to be obviously number one, two, three. It could be. What would you say to somebody that you're trying to get into the band? What are some of the albums that you would recommend if you could rattle off three of
Well, honestly, I think they would be the top three for me, and here's why. Uh, they, starting in the early '80s, they had that really kind of heavy. They kind of almost, you know, along with other acts like Ozzy and stuff. They were kind of they were. It's like almost proto hair metal. It's like they weren't quite. It wasn't like the glammy hair metal stuff. There was something kind of heavy and gritty and dirty about it. So I would say Creatures for that, to kind of represent that era, that kind of element. I would
them?
say, but Unmasked because their pop sensibilities are great. And then I would say Destroyer because it's got such anthemic classics on it. So I would say those three, honestly.
Yeah, and
Those three.
those are really good
Yeah.
picks.
What
Good
would
answer.
you say? What would you say then?
I'd go with Creatures because I think it is their best record, and I've said this before. It's we've always been a big fan about the transitional period that the band went through. Um, that out of such chaos came such a gem of a record with so much unknown and turnover and turmoil that they were going through that they were able to crank out a record that's that good. So I would say Creatures. Um, I would probably also say Asylum because I think it's an easily overlooked record, but it really is a really, really good album, maybe with the exception of one or two tracks. The first tour that we got to see them live on was that particular tour, which is also makes it kind of memorable and special for us, I'm sure. And then I'd be hard pressed not to say the debut simply because that's where it all started. And you pointed out earlier how the very early stages of the band is a really fun period that we like to listen to, and we like that era of the band a lot as well. So I would probably say the debut Creatures in Asylum would give you kind of another broad look at the
Yeah.
diversity in the catalog. So there's just a lot of really good stuff here.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of
I think that kind of makes sense. I think it seems reasonable. Sure. Um, okay, so let's do just a quick recap because since we did chunk those for this purpose, for this exercise, let's just recap our top 20, and then at the end we'll just do a little comment or two about the stuff that we're involved in, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, sure, sounds
Okay.
good.
All right. So again, the 20 spot for me was Revenge,
I got Shade,
followed by Psycho Circus,
Crazy Nights,
Crazy Nights,
Sonic Boom,
Carnival of Souls,
Psycho Circus,
look it up,
Revenge,
Asylum,
Monster,
Sonic Boom,
Animalize,
Hot in the Shade,
Carnival of Souls,
Love Gun,
Love Gun,
Music from the Elder,
Debut,
the number 10 spot, top 10, the debut,
Asylum,
Dress to Kill, number 9.
Rock and Roll Over at number 9,
8 for me was Animalize.
And 8 for me was Dynasty.
followed by Monster,
And I got Hotter Than Hell.
and then for me, at 6 was Hotter Than Hell.
I got Dress to Kill.
5 for moi was Rock and Roll Over,
And I got Music from the Elevator.
and then Dynasty 4,
Look It Up 4.
3 Destroyer,
Unmasked.
number 2 Unmasked,
And number 2 is Destroyer.
and by a hair, Creatures at number 1.
Creatures at number 1.
Cool. So if you are a Kiss fan and you think that we're crazy, or if you think that maybe we're onto something and you agree, give us your thoughts. Give us your list. It'd be kind of cool to see what other people think about this stuff. And as I said at the beginning, we're part of a group of guys. Well, we go under the name Underlords of the Overworld, which is just kind of a fancy way of kind of saying unknown underdogs. We'd like to think that we're the lords or masters of our own domain, so to speak. And we write and record music. And basically, we write and record whatever comes to mind. We've been playing together for a long time. And it started off as kind of an instrumental project. It's slowly morphed into more of a concept-based project with a backstory. And we're on Spotify and Bandcamp. You know, if you're feeling generous, you could even buy something from Bandcamp. Oh gosh, can't reach over here. Getting old. Our bass player writes under the name H. Prescott Lemon, and he wrote a fictional backstory that kind of parallels I guess you could say it parallels the reality of our experiences of being absolute nobodies, but it's about like 99.8% hogwash and about 0.2% reality. And it's called Underlords of the Overworld. The first book is called Origins of the Damned, and he ended up expanding it into a broader universe with kind of a absurd. He's kind of got a bit of an absurdity streak in him, which is really kind of fun. A series called the OAO, Ordo Abstrusus Oculus, and it's kind of a occult based, kind of a silly, but kind of goofy, but not like, I don't want to say, it's not like slapstick comedy or anything like that. It just has kind of a thread of absurdity to it, but and a little bit of darkness to it as well. But the first volume, that's called The Consciousness Eater, and these are things that are kind of like now becoming lyrical inspirations for us for the new music that we're writing and recording and stuff. And but his work is available on Amazon. You can buy it anywhere in the world through Amazon.com. So yeah, if you're interested, you'd like to support us, you know, we're not asking for anything, any support beyond just checking out the creative stuff that we do. We don't really consider ourselves YouTubers. We're just more of involved in a creative project that we happen to do videos for on YouTube as well. But we're not actually out to be like YouTube review guys, which we're just talking about the stuff that inspires us. So
Right? We're fans. And this
yeah,
is what we do.
it. So
We just said, talk about these records anyway. Why don't we just talk about it and make videos? Sure.
yeah,
There you go.
maybe if you're a Kiss fan out there and maybe you're interested in checking out our stuff, that's cool. We really appreciate it. So and if not, that's cool too. You know, God bless you. So let's see. Anything else before we sign off?
I think we have completed this mission, and the next mission for Kiss is we got to move on to the solo albums, and that'll be an interesting episode. So let's.
It will be. Yes. Yes. Okay. All right. Until next time, ciao. And thanks for tuning in. And please like, subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications, and give us your comments. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Toodles.